Evening had begun like any other dinner at the John household. You and Jungkook were invited by his mother. It had been a while since you had spent time with her, and you hoped it would be a peaceful evening for you both after the long day at office. Mrs. John had always been warm and welcoming to you, treating you like a daughter, despite knowing the nature of your marriage. But tonight felt different. As you stepped into the lavish John family house, you immediately noticed something was off, though you couldn't quite place it. "Ryan, Jungkook, it's so good to have you here," she said. Her voice was overly cheerful, but something felt off. She didn't pull you into a warm hug like she always did. Instead, she stood there, smiling a polite, almost forced smile. Her eyes flickered with something unreadable as she looked at you. The familiar glow that had always made you feel at home in her presence was gone. Jungkook, who was always by your side, seemed oblivious to the shift. He smiled back at his mother, giving her a quick hug. You, however, caught a glimpse of Mrs. John's eyes, narrowed just slightly as it took a moment too long to meet your gaze. It felt like there was something beneath the surface, something she wasn't saying. You greeted her back, trying to put on a brave face. "Hello, Mom, and thank you for having us," you said, your voice steady but unsure, and her smile only widened in response, though it felt more like a mask than her usual genuine affection. The dinner table was set beautifully and you all sat down, but even the familiar chatter around the table couldn't fully distract you from the odd tension in the air. Mrs. John's behavior was more erratic than usual. She would look at you while speaking, her words coated with a strange, overly sweet tone that you couldn't quite decipher. Occasionally, her eyes would flicker towards Jungkook as if expecting him to react to something, but he seemed lost in his own world, absorbed in the conversation with his father. Then there were the moments when she suddenly laughed, her laugh too bright, too forced, as though there was something she found amusing that no one else could see. It was disconcerting. You felt her words sharp, almost as though she were taunting you, though the meaning behind them was unclear. "You know, Ryan, you always dress so modestly. It's so refreshing to see someone who doesn't need all that extra attention, don't you think?" she said, taking a sip of her wine. Her eyes lingered on you just a little too longer. You forced a smile, trying to mask your discomfort. "Thank you, Mom." Jungkook obviously continued talking to his father about business. Mrs. John's lips curled into a smile, too bright, too deliberate. "Mrs. Jones, it's just so rare these days. You know, women these days, well, they like to, how do I put it, stand out." Your grip tightened around your fork. There was an underlying meaning behind her words, but you weren't sure what. "You're right, Mom. I have always thought it was impressive how Ryan doesn't try to stand out too much. It's almost like she knows her place." Jungwon's tone was casual, but the smirk on his face as he spoke was anything but friendly. His eyes flickered to you, taking a moment to watch your reaction, clearly enjoying the discomfort he was causing. It was a cheap trick, one you were all too familiar with, but for some reasons it stung more tonight than ever. You had long since learned to ignore Jungwon's attempt to undermine you. He had always had a knack for using backhanded compliments and subtle digs to make people feel small, but tonight the stakes felt higher. Mrs. Jones, normally so warm and welcoming, was taking part in it too, and that hurt more than you cared to admit. "I suppose everyone has their own way of expressing themselves," Mrs. John hummed, tilting her head. Mrs. John, "Of course, though sometimes blending in can be just as effective, don't you think?" Your stomach twisted. There was something deeper in her words. Was she implying something about you, about your place in this family? Jungkook finally glanced over, sensing the shift in your expression. "Mom, what are you trying to say?" Mrs. John chuckled, lightly waving a hand dismissively. "Oh, nothing, dear. Just some casual conversation. Ryan understands, don't you, sweetheart?" She sought you a look, challenging, testing. You swallowed down the unease and forced a smile. "Of course, Mom." The conversation continued, but each comment from her felt heavier, more pointed. She seemed to be, yet no one else at the table seemed to notice the underlying tension. Jungkook was focused on the discussion with his father about business matters, and his father was too preoccupied with his own thoughts to notice the subtle way his wife was behaving. Despite the light-hearted conversation, you couldn't shake the feeling that you were the subject of some unspoken joke. Her eyes would occasionally flicker towards Jungkook and then back to you, almost as though she were trying to see if you would crack, if you would reveal something that would make sense of the tension in the room. After dinner, the conversation naturally moved to more relaxed topics. Jungkook and his father went to the living room to talk about an upcoming business venture, his voice animated as he discussed details with Mr. John and Jungwon, who had joined them for the evening. Dad, we have been looking at expanding into new markets. Jungwon and I have been reviewing the project's potential impact on our current portfolio. Expanding is always tricky. What makes this venture different from your previous attempts? Jungwon, sitting across from you, leaned in slightly, his tone confident and focused as he explained their strategy. We have developed a concept that blends both traditional business models with modern approaches. This could reach a much wider demographic. Their voices slowly fading as they discussed matters in private. Mrs. John, for once, seemed distracted, her attention shifting to her phone as it vibrated on the table. It was then that you felt the weight of being alone in the room. The uncomfortable silence between you and Mrs. John seemed to stretch, and you couldn't bear the awkwardness any longer. Without saying anything, you excused yourself and quietly walked towards the balcony, needing a breath of fresh air. The cool evening breeze greeted you as you stepped outside, the gentle rustle of the leaves outside soothing your nerves. You leaned against the railing, your thoughts swirling. What had gotten Mrs. John? The warmth she always extended had been replaced with something cold, something subtle yet unmistakably unsettling. It felt like she was angry at you for something, but you had no idea why. You closed your eyes, trying to let go of the discomfort, trying to clear your mind. What you didn't know was that someone else had noticed you slip away. Jungwon, Jungkook's younger brother, had been lurking nearby, and when he saw you leave the room, he decided to follow. You didn't hear him approach until he spoke. Well, well, looks like someone needs some air, Jungwon said, his voice carrying a teasing edge. You turned, startled, your heart skipping a beat at the sudden interruption. Jungwon was standing a few feet away from you, his arms casually crossed as he watched you, a smug smile tugging at his lips. Jungwon, what are you doing here? You said, trying to keep your voice steady. He chuckled, his smile only deepening. Oh, just enjoying the view? It's rare to see you alone like this. His gaze lingered on you, and you immediately felt uncomfortable. There was something about the way he looked at you that made your skin crawl, something predatory, almost as if he were seizing you up for something. I just needed some space, you said, taking a step back towards the edge of the balcony, trying to put distance between you and Jungwon. But Jungwon wasn't done. You know, he began stepping closer, his voice soft but insistent. I don't think you really belong here, do you? You raised an eyebrow, confused. What are you talking about? Jungwon's eyes twinkled with mischief, and he took another step towards you. You're just the secretary who somehow got lucky. Don't fool yourself thinking that John Enterprises CEO John Jungkook Mahyung fall in love with you and married Ryan. He married you because Appa thought you would be the perfect match for him, and my innocent obedient Hyung married you. His words were a sharp jab, and you felt your pulse quicken. The way he spoke to you with that air of superiority felt like he was trying to break you down, and you hated every moment of it. I don't know what your opinion about is, Jungwon, but I am married to Jungkook. Nothing's going to change that. You said, trying to keep your voice calm, but your anger was rising. Jungwon laughed softly, a low mocking sound. Oh sure, but let's see how long that lasts. You are not the temporary distraction. You are not one of us. But remember, it will not work longer. Sooner or later, my parents and Hyung will eventually realize that you were fooling us with your fake perfection mask. Your eyes widened in disbelief. What was he insinuating? You know, Jungwon wasn't trying to upset you. He was trying to get under your skin, trying to create doubt, and somehow it felt like he wasn't done yet. You had enough. You weren't going to stay here any longer. With a firm step, you turned to leave, but before you could take another step, a strong hand grabbed your wrist. The grip was tight, almost possessive. You froze. Where do you think you are going? Jungwon's voice was low, taunting, laced with amusement, his fingers tightening around your wrist as he tilted his head, his absorbed smirk making your stomach churn in disgust. Jungwon, how dare you? Let go my hand, you gritted out, trying to yank your hand away, but he only tightened his hold. Come on, don't act so cold. We were just getting to the fun part, he chuckled. Jungwon, I will do something you will regret, I swear. Let me go. You snapped, your patience wearing thin, but before you could push him away, a sharp voice cut through the air like a blade. What the hell is going on here? Mrs. John. You turned in horror to see her standing at the entrance of the balcony, her eyes widened in shock, her gaze flickered between you and Jungwon, and in that moment you saw something shift in her expression, anger, disbelief, and accusation. Jungwon's grip loosened slightly, but before you could step away, he suddenly smirked and did the unthinkable. See, Mom, I told you. See, he sighed dramatically, shaking his head as if he were in distress. Your entire body went rigid. What? You whispered, disbelief coursing through you. Mrs. John's face twisted in rage as she took a step forward. What did you just say? Jungwon let out a frustrated sigh and rubbed the back of his neck as if he were embarrassed. I didn't want to say anything, Mom, but she's been acting this way for a while. She followed me out here, and when I told her to stop, she caved. He looked at you with a fake pity. I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want to ruin things for my Hyung, but I guess you saw it yourself. You were speechless. Your mouth open then closed, your mind struggling to comprehend what was happening. He was twisting everything. He was making it look like you were the one at fault. That's a lie. He was the one who followed me. He's the one who grabbed my wrist to stop me. You shouted, your chest tightening with anger. But Mrs. John wasn't listening. How dare you? After everything, after all this time, this is how you repay our family? She hissed, her voice shaking with fury. Mom, please at least listen. A sound echoed. A burning sting exploded across your cheek. You stumbled back, your vision blurring for a moment. From the sheer force, your ears ran the weight of the accusation and the sharp pain colliding into you all at once. Your breath hitched. Did she just? Your fingers trembled as they hovered over your stinging cheek, your heart hammering in your chest. The humiliation, the betrayal, the sheer injustice of it all, it made your entire body shake. Mom, Jungkook's voice rang out, sharp and furious. You turned to see him standing there, his eyes wide, his entire body tense. Mr. John was behind him, his gaze dark with something unreadable. Jungkook's gaze snapped to Jungwon, then to you, and finally to his mother. What did you just do? Jungkook's voice was dangerously low, Mrs. John still fuming, pointing a trembling finger at you. See, your younger brother, I saw it with my own eyes. Jungkook, I saw it. Jungkook's eyes flickered towards you, scanning your face, his jaw clenched when he noticed the way your hands trembled at your sides, your cheeks flushed with suppressed emotions, and more importantly, the redness on your cheek where his mother had struck. You didn't say anything. You were too stunned, too humiliated to even defend yourself. And then Jungkook turned to Jungwon. Tell the truth. His voice was ice, a warning. Jungwon, ever the actor, let out a dramatic sigh. Hyung, I didn't want to say anything, but tell the truth. Jungwon faltered for a split second, but then regaining his confidence, he put on his best hurt expression. I am. Why would I lie about something like this? Jungkook moved fast. Before anyone could react, Jungkook had grabbed Jungwon by the collar and slammed him against the balcony wall. Hyung, you really think I would believe this bullshit? Jungkook crawled, his voice dangerously low, his fingers tightened around Jungwon's collar, his muscles tense with restrained fury. Jungkook's smirk faltered. Hyung, I don't know what you... Jungkook yanked him closer. You have always been a snake, but this... He let out a humorless laugh. This is a new low, even for you. Mrs. John gasped, stepping forward. Jungkook, let him go, he's your brother. Jungkook ignored her, his gaze burned into Jungwon's, his voice dropping to a whisper only he could hear. You think you can turn me against her? His fingers tightened. You think I don't know my own wife? Jungwon swallowed, his confidence finally wavering. Jungkook's grip on him was suffocating, his fury radiating in waves. Jungkook, let him go. Mr. John finally spoke, his deep voice cutting through the tension. Jungkook held Jungwon's gaze for a moment longer before shoving him away with disgust. Jungwon stumbled, coughing as he straightened himself. Jungkook's body trembled with rage, his fist clenched, his knuckle white as he glared at his younger brother, who stood there with that same damn smirk, that smirk that had been tormenting you since the moment you married into this family. He turned to his mother, his eyes filled with nothing but disappointment. And Mom, what was wrong with you? Do you even hear yourself? His voice was sharp, laced with unfiltered anger. You were so quick to believe her capable of this. Did you ever stop to think? Did you even ask her? Did you once consider that your precious son might be lying? Jungkook eyed Mrs. John opened her mouth, but Jungkook didn't let her speak. You just assumed she could stoop so low because she isn't rich, that because she didn't come from our status, she must be someone who lacks moral, right? He let out a bitter laugh. Then tell me, Mom, what about your son's class? Mrs. John flinched. Jungkook scoffed, shaking his head. Jungwon has been humiliating her from the moment we got married. And do you know why? He turned his blurring gaze to Jungwon, his voice dropping lower, more dangerous. Because before our marriage, she didn't let him ever come near her. She ignored him, never gave him a chance, never entertained his spoiled, entitled behavior, and that brushed his damn ego. Jungwon's smirk wavered for a split second, but he kept up his act. Hyung, you are twisting things. I will if you say another word. Jungkook cut him off, taking a menacing step forward. Jungwon instinctively stepped back. Jungkook's eyes were wild, filled with a fire so intense it made even Mr. John shift uncomfortably. His voice grew colder, sharper. He knew she wouldn't say anything because of her family's respect. He knew she was enduring everything quietly because she didn't want to create problems, and he used that against her. His words sliced through the air. Tell me, Mom, does class mean everything to you? Did you ever once see her for who she is instead of where she came from? Or was it easier for you to believe that she was trash just because she doesn't belong to your perfect little world? His voice was laced with pain. Now his disappointment flowing through. Mrs. John's lip quivered, but she remained silent. Jungkook let out a humorless chuckle before stepping closer to Jungwon, his entire body being radiating in fury. And you, he said, his voice dangerously low, you really thought you could get away with this? That she wouldn't fight back because she has no family to protect her? That her own husband is useless and wouldn't do anything to protect her? Jungwon's face paled. Jungkook's muscle tensed, his fist tightening as if he was about to launch forward and punch the life out of his younger brother. But before he could take another step, a loud sob broke through the suffocating tension. It was you. Jungkook immediately turned, his fury melting into concern the moment he saw you. You stood there, your hands trembling at your sides, your lip parted as you tried to keep yourself together, but the weight of everything crashed down on you, forcing the sobs to spill from your chest. It wasn't just about tonight, it was everything. The silent suffering, the humiliation, the pain of being accused, the pain of being by the woman who once treated you like her own daughter. Your shoulders shook as another sob escaped. Jungkook's eyes softened in an instant. When his voice was barely a whisper, now the anger in his forgotten as he took a step closer to you. Your breath hitched when he cupped your face, his thumb gently tracing over the burning redness on your cheek. His touch was hesitant, almost afraid to hurt you more than you already were. You looked up at him through teary eyes, your vision blurry from the flood of emotion. Jungkook exhaled sharply, his gaze filled with something unreadable, but his hold on you was firm, secure, as if he was silently telling you that he was here, that you weren't alone in this anymore. It's okay, you're with me, no one will ever come near to you. He murmured, his voice barely audible as he wiped a stray tear from your cheek. Another sob wrecked through you, and without a second thought, Jungkook pulled you into his chest, wrapping his arms around you protectively. You clung to him, your fingers clutching onto his shirt, seeking warmth, seeking comfort. Jungkook turned his gaze towards his mother, his expression unreadable now, but the disappointment in his eyes was clear. Mrs. John looked down, guilt evident in the way her hands trembled at her sides. Mr. John, who had been silent all this time, finally spoke. His voice was deep, authoritative. Jungwon? Jungwon stiffened. Get out. Dad? Jungwon's eyes widened. I said out before I throw you out myself. Mr. John repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. Jungwon swallowed hard, looking around for any sort of support, but there was none, not from his parents, not from his brother, and definitely not from you. With a clenched jaw, Jungwon scoffed, turning on his heel and storming out. Silence filled the air. Jungkook didn't let you go, his arms still wrapped around you, his warmth seeping into your cold, trembling body. You had never expected him to fight for you like this, never expected him to take your side so fiercely, so unconditionally. You weren't sure what this meant for your relationship, but in this moment, as he held you close, whispering quiet reassurance in your ear, you know one thing was certain. You weren't alone. Not anymore. Jungkook turned over his shoulder to look at his mother, his expression unreadable. Mom, next time don't throw accusation unless you have proof, he said, his voice calmer but still lashed with anger. Mrs. John opened her mouth, but no words came out. Jungkook turned to you, slowly pulling you back, his eyes softening slightly. Without hesitation, he reached out, his warm fingers grazing over the red mark on your cheek. His jaw clenched again. Let's go. You didn't hesitate as Jungkook slid his hands around your shoulder as you let him lead you out of the house.